Curtin Radio in Perth.
Well, we're joined by Trevor Tough, who's been on the program before, and we're talking Outback Graves, and you'll probably be aware of the Outback Grave Marker project that's been going on. In fact, we did speak to Trevor's, I think, son-in-law the other day, Lee Forster, who is a musician, and we played a song that he had written called Outback Graves. Well, here to talk about Outback Graves is Trevor Tough. Good afternoon, Trevor.
G'day, Carl. Thanks for having us on your program.
Lovely to talk to you. Now, for those who are not aware of what you guys do, just give us a quick run over the target.
Okay, this is a project we started about 5 years ago with the idea of marking and recording the stories of a lot of these pioneer graves, lonely graves that aren't in major cemeteries, but they're dotted around on stations and in the goldfields and mining areas.
Yeah. Okay. There must be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them.
Oh yes. So far we've done just over 650 across Western Australia.
Yeah.
There'd be thousands left to do, and we're just starting to go national. We've opened in South Australia, and now got a fellow interested in New South Wales, and we reckon it'll take 50 to 100 years to mark the bulk of them across Australia.
So I mean, how do you find these places, these graves? I mean, a lot of them wouldn't be well marked, would they? So how do you know where to look?
There's some very good records in Western Australia.
Yeah.
Also, a couple called Yvonne and Kevin Coate wrote a series of books called Lonely Graves of Western Australia.
Right.
And they've done 40 or 50 years of research, so that's really our start point. But we're working closely with a lot of the shires, with Leonora, Wiluna, Laverton, Sandstone, Menzies.
Yeah.
And they just give us free access to the records. It's great.
Now, talking about places like Menzies, you have been marking graves recently, and I notice you've marked a couple out at Lake Darlot, which, tell us about where Lake Darlot is.
Okay, Darlot is...
Or Darlot, it's not Darlot. You don't pronounce the T, it's a sort of a French pronunciation.
That's the one, yeah. And it's out east of Leinster.
Right, okay.
And we've been marking some graves there. It's really quite interesting. The local mining company there relocated about 8 graves they wanted to extend their tailings dam.
Yeah. And
these graves are in the way. So a very good project they put together to properly relocate these 8 graves. And so we're nearly finished making 27 plaques for the Lake Darlot Cemetery. Yeah. And Darlot came about because back in February 1892, a bloke called Lawrence Wells was the leader of an expedition to explore the area east of the Murchison River. And you can imagine how isolated it was there in those days. And he was a surveyor, and he found and named Lake Way, Lake Darlot and Lake Wells. And Lake Darlot was named after a well-known squatter in the Murchison area called Lou Darlot. And only 2 years later, a gold rush at Darlot began. And you can imagine there was no facilities or water much was there. The only water was taken from several shallow wells. And there's certainly little water to spare for washing or hygiene. And so in 1894 and 1895, there were big typhoid outbreaks in Coolgardie and at Kew. Right. And they were the towns from where the diggers came to Darlot. And it's also possible some diggers caught the infection at the Mount Black gold rush. And we know that George Bishop and Robert Elver, 2 of the 8 graves that were relocated and returned to Darlot, they returned to Darlot from Mount Black only 2 weeks before they died. And so there's graves at Mount Darlot covering the period from March 1895 through to 1919, and one was added in April 1936. An old fellow was buried there. So 9 out of the 27 people buried at Lake Darlot died of typhoid between the 24th of March and the 15th of August in 1895. So it was a big outbreak. Yeah,
there's nothing they could do about typhoid much in those days. I've got a couple of the plaques, actually. They're the Elvers you were talking about. It says, near here lies Sydney Elver, prospector and miner, aged 28, died of typhoid 15th of August 1895, and Robert Elver, prospector and miner, aged 31, died of typhoid on the 27th of July 1895.
Yeah, they were 2 of 3 brothers who were prospecting and mining up in that area.
Now, you've got a couple of other plaques there. Tell me about the stories behind those.
Yeah, these are plaques for a fellow called Hermanus Look, and he was a teamster aged about 55, and he perished 30 miles northwest of Lake Darlow about 1897. So he must have been carting goods out there for the miners, I guess. And with him was his young son, aged about 15. He was Henry Look, and he also perished in the same about the same time. But there was a funny little story came up in a newspaper saying that they had that young Henry had turned up with the horses in Meekatharra a month or so later, and we think that's really unlikely. If the old father, experienced bushman, perished out there, I can't see that his 15-year-old son would have made it all the way to Meekatharra. It's just not possible.
Wow. And I mean, there's a lot of stories behind these outback graves, of course, and each one of them has quite an interesting story behind it. Sometimes we don't realise how difficult pioneering life was, and of course a lot of young children died as well. And I noticed that you've been out at Bolgart marking some graves there.
That's right. Just a couple of weeks ago, one of our people, Blue Malumbi, went out there, and he installed 3 plaques we'd made for some children of our pioneers who died on a farm at Bolgart.
Yeah.
And it seems, as you say, pioneering wasn't easy, and Bolgart must have been a pretty isolated place. All 3 of these little kids were the children of Margaret and Charles Hennessy. So young John Lachlan Hennessy died at only 3 months old in 1876. And not long after, in 1877, Margaret, also aged 3 months, died. And then on the 14th of May 1884, Mary, aged 5, died. So these poor folk lost 3 little kids there.
Yeah, and I guess that was just an indication of how tough pioneering life was. I mean, Bolgart, in terms of its distance from Perth, is not all that far, but it was pretty isolated back in the 1800s.
If you were travelling by horse and cart.
It took a long time to get there. Now, one of the oldest graves, the earliest, I should say, that you've marked is the one of Charles Farmer, which takes us all the way back to 1854.
I think this is the earliest grave we've done.
Yeah.
And he's buried in a very isolated place, about 23 miles out on the Mount Farmer Station Road from Mount Magnet.
Yeah.
And he was born on the 2nd of June, 1832, and he died of tetanus after a gun accident. He was the son of Mary Ann and Charles Farmer, who was a shipwright. And so in 1854, young Charles was exploring in the Mount Magnet area with Robert Austin and his exploration party, and they opened up a lot of that area through there. And on the 19th of September, young Farmer accidentally shot himself, shattering his arm between the wrist and the elbow. And although the arm appeared to be improving, soon tetanus set in, and he died an agonising death 8 days after the accident.
Terrible.
And when they buried him, he was sewn up in his blanket and lowered gently into his grave in a horse rug, where his head was rested upon his saddle. He must have been greatly respected, as Mount Farmer and Mount Charles were named in his honour. So here's another fine young pioneer whose story deserves to be told.
These are just fabulous stories, aren't they? I'm just amazed at how you get this level of detail. Is this all on record somewhere?
Yes, we've got a very good research team of ladies, and they get into Trove, and Trove is you probably know about Trove. Yeah. And a lot of those records are in there, but we get into old police day books and all sorts of stuff here. It's really interesting.
Fabulous. Now, in terms of this particular project, I mean, it's obviously you've got to travel, you've got to do research, you've got to make the plaques. You're telling me you recently bought some engraving equipment?
Yes, we've been very fortunate. The shires, we have 5 shires have been backing us, and they're all isolated shires. Quite interesting that they are so intent on getting their history recorded. Yeah. So the shires of Leonora and Laverton, Wiluna, Menzies and Sandstone, and they have helped us with funding. So we've just purchased 2 new rotary engraving machines for about $35,000. Yep. And we're setting them up at Westcare, which is a marvellous institution that look after people with some disabilities and provide employment. And we're setting them up there, and that will raise our ability to make plaques. From last year we made about 300 as volunteers, and this will lift it up to we'll be able to produce 1,000 a year.
And so the project is funded entirely by the Shires. They support it.
Yeah, it's been self-funded up until about a year ago, and then the Shires came in, and it's really changed what we're able to do. It's been a great turning point.
We had a call from Barry, and he wants to know, and this is may not be within your bailiwick, but you might be able to help us, where to go to find out where his great-grandfather, who died in Meeka Hospital way back in 1932, might be buried. How do you...
In Meeka?
Yeah. Where would be the best place to get that sort of information?
I'd start with the Shire records.
Yeah, Shire
Death
records.
Yep. The Shires have very good records.
Yeah. It's amazing, because I didn't realise that all those records were out there. Now, when you discover these graves, are they usually marked, or are they sometimes there's no markings at all?
Often there's no markings at all. Some of the cemeteries, like we're going to go and do Murrin and Anaconda, and there's no evidence there a cemetery's ever been there.
So your plaque actually says near here lies,
right,
rather than this is where.
Yeah, and often the cemeteries will have half a dozen or so graves with headstones, and the other 100 may not have headstones at all, so we don't know who's in which graves. So then we put our plaques up in rows, a bit like a Commonwealth War Graves cemetery.
You've started a bit of a monster here, haven't you?
Yeah.
How many do you reckon you're going to have to mark in this project? That you're talking about hundreds, thousands and thousands. So it's going to be a project that will go on and on and on and on to make sure that...
We think it'll take 50 to 100 years.
And you've shown me these plaques are made out of aluminium.
Yeah, 3mm aluminium.
And they're engraved and they're put on a post, obviously, just near where the grave is. So when people go out there in the future, they'll be able to read about this. And I did ask you about books, but one of the problems with books with stories in is they do go out of
they do
the currency very quickly as you expand.
You publish a book and then all of a sudden you get some new information in, or you find a date's wrong or an age is wrong.
Yeah, it's hard.
And you're really stuck. We've published it all on our website.
Yep.
And people can go there. It's www.outbackgraves.org.
Yep.
And we've got 650 or a few more stories in there now.
Trevor, it's a fabulous project, and I'm sure you'll be back on this show to talk to either myself or Jenny in the future and give us a bit more of a rundown of some of the news stories that you discover on the way.
Yeah. Oh, just incidentally, that gentleman, he can send us an email if he likes with the details he has of his grandfather's grave. We'll see what we can find for him.
And the person to contact is Trevor@outbackgraves.org.
That's right. They can do it through our website or
www.outbackgraves.org. If you're interested in this project, you want to find out more, or you may be wanting a bit of help to find one of your pioneers that might be somewhere in Western Australia. Trevor, thanks very much for your time this afternoon.
Thanks.
Very much appreciated. And we did get a call from Bernice from Balga, who would like to know where you could buy the CD that I played the other day. That's the one by Lee Forster, and it has a song on it called Outback Graves, which is a poem, really. It's I played it the other day, and it's a very poignant poem about Outback Graves. You can buy it by contacting Lee Forster on leeforster.com.au. He will send you the CD, and if you like it, he will ask you to send him $20 back. If you don't like it, you can send him the CD back. You can't get fairer than that, can you? So that's how you get a copy of that particular CD and the wonderful, wonderful poem on it, which is called Outback Graves.